morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I want to thank you for taking time from your valuable schedule to be with me today. I've got two fantastic guests today, Rob Freeman and Marcus McNabb, who are with Skylight Films. And I saw this story that we're going to do today in Toronto, I believe it was, correct? Rob, you did this in Toronto?
It was at the Alien Expo that I told you the story.
Yeah. And next month, officially, I'll be in this circus for 45 years. And this is one of the most amazing stories I've ever seen. I made Rob tell me we were at the a dinner table, and Rob is a Canadian UFO researcher who films and videotapes some of the most amazing sights of anomalous craft in the sky above. An active field researcher, Rob has been interested in UFOs since age 12, which I didn't know, and he saw something unexplained above his parents' house. And he's joined by his assistant, Mark. And we also have joining us is Desta Barnaby, who's an assistant of mine, who's going to produce all this, and she may come up with questions. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little chat box. If somebody wants to ask a question or whatever, so we get on track, we can do that. We use the chat box. But I want to welcome Rob and Mark. Welcome for the second time. We did this once before and we didn't have very good signal quality, but I appreciate you coming to tell me these stories that you're going to tell, because I've seen a lot of stories, and this is one of the most amazing stories I've seen in 45 years of research. So maybe give me a little bit of background, and then if you want to ask me questions about mine. I started in 1976 in Carmen, Manitoba. Had no interest in UFOs. There was a small town that was being inundated with UFOs, and I just said to my friend, I said, let's, instead of driving around Winnipeg, let's go out to Carmen, Manitoba, and let's see what everybody's looking at. And we didn't go for 3 months, and then the local TV station, CKY TV, actually caught this thing on the ground, jumping off the ground. They had tried to capture it on film. They got it on film, and that was 3 months later. And it was at that point I said to my friend, come on, let's go see what they're looking at. And I always describe it as buying the lottery ticket, that you buy the lottery ticket and you think, well, there's a chance you're going to win, but you know you're not going to win. You're not going to see anything. We're going to go out there and nothing. And we were there for an hour. We drove into town, out of the town, in the town, out of the town. And then my friend Larry, who I still have coffee with every week, said to me, he said, okay, we'll go into town one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home. I said, fantastic. This has been a total waste of time. We turned the car to go back into this town of Carmen. We're heading west into the town, and the thing appeared from the left to the right. It was down low. It was a pulsing plasma type object. And nobody in the car said, is that what it is? Because we were looking around, we're saying, is that what it is? We were looking at stars and planets, like, what's everybody looking at? What's all this? Because it was in the newspaper, it was all over the place. And everybody just said, there it is. We just instinctively knew. And my friends went on with their life. I took probably 100 people out to see these objects on the ground, in the air. And they all went on with their life, and I just fell off the edge of the earth. And that's how I got started. I just was absolutely overwhelmed. And I published a book. And I tried to publish a book. Nobody would take the book. The local publisher said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And I went, wow, I couldn't believe it. It's like, I thought I had the biggest story in the world. And you guys have done the same sort of thing, where you try to pick up this phenomena, and then you try to get the story out. And that seems to be the hard part, is trying to get people to realize that this is a real phenomena. And so I started on my pursuit through the Canadian government, through the former president of Penn State University. I went after the president of the United States, and I went after senators, and I went after the guys at the CIA, the top guys that were the briefers of the president on this subject. And I basically came back to understanding that it is the people who are interacting with the phenomena that you got to watch. And a lot of people have early childhood experience, which Rob, you can describe that. And I realized that people, for some reason, are tapped into this, that they seem to be able to pick it up. They seem to be able to film orbs. Even this morning, there's a big controversy about orbs, which you guys may have. And they're saying, oh, it's dust particles. So I started doing experiments this morning, and I actually did a lot of filming. I did with 1 minute segments in low light, in rooms and stuff. I haven't picked up an orb yet. So I firmly believe that the people photographing it have some connection to the phenomena, because not everybody can film this thing. So I'll turn it over to you, Rob, and maybe describe how you got dragged down the rabbit hole And because you've been doing it a long time as well. And what are you up to? You run Skylight Films, and you do a lot of documentary stuff on UFOs, and you got one in Squamish. I think it was a real dramatic UFO sighting. So go from there and describe what you guys are doing.
Sure. And it's actually Marcus that runs Skylight Films, and he's a good friend of mine.
Okay.
And I guess to really start the story, it would be when I was 12 years old. And I was in Scouts, and my mom this is in Sarnia, Ontario. My mom had told me, call me when you're finished, and I'll come and get you. And so Scouts was over. It was a Monday night. It was way back in, don't even remember the date. Marcus, do you remember the date? It was way back in 1960.
1966, Rob. It was in March. I remember you mentioned it was in March of 66.
That's it, 1966.
Wow.
And Scouts was over. I called my mom to pick me up. She says, I'll be there in about 20 minutes. But she said, go outside of the church. This is St. Andrew's Presbyterian in Sarnia, Ontario, backing onto the St. Clair River. I go outside because they had to lock the door after Scouts. I go out and there's some kids in the street. And they said, hey, mister, there's a helicopter up in the sky. Why they called me mister, I don't know. I was only 12 years old, but I had a scout hat and tie and so on, and shiny shoes. But anyway, I looked up and I looked at this thing that was just moving slowly from the north to the south, no blinking lights. And I said to the kids, that's not a helicopter. There was no sound. And they said, well, what is it? I said, I don't know. The kids left. I was there left by myself, and I was watching this thing. And it was going slowly from the north to the south, and each time it would get lower. And it was up at maybe 800 feet. And I could see what appeared to be something spinning real fast. And as it got lower and lower, it looked like there was like a lens in the bottom, and almost like it was backlit. I'm waiting for my mom to get there, and I'm getting nervous all by myself. And I really had the feeling that this thing was stalking me all of a sudden. And I looked closer, I strained my eyes, and this light on the bottom, it almost appeared that there was figures moving around. And that's when the hair stood up on my arm. And just then, my mom got there. And I implored her to get out of the car. I said, Mom, you got to get out of the car. And she said, I said, there's a UFO up in the sky. And she said, oh, don't be silly. You know, you've got to do your homework and all this. And I said, get out of the car. And it took me about 15 or 20 seconds to get her out of the car. We got out of the car and looked up, and it was gone. And of course, I was pretty quiet on the way back. You know, I kind of thought that she thought I'm making up the whole thing. We get back to the house. I tell my dad and my brother, they just laugh. I go into my room and do my homework and went to bed. The next day, this is where it really hit, because when I got home from school, my mom said, Rob, what you saw last night is all over the front page of the newspaper. And she showed me the article. She read it to me. I've got a copy of the newspaper today. And it described how over 200 people had seen this. People on the state side in Port Huron. They even scrambled a couple of Air Force fighters from Selfridge Air Force Base, just south of Port Huron, Michigan, on the US side there. And when they tried to catch up to it, it just took off at a high rate of speed. So, you know, very interesting stuff. A lot of people had seen it, police officers, everyday people had seen it. And, you know, what was really interesting was, you know, I now became the celebrity at school that had seen this UFO. And my friend that lived across from me, he said, Rob, how could I see well, we called them flying saucers at that time. He says, how could I see a flying saucer? And I said, I don't know. Maybe if we go on the roof of my house on a clear night, let's just go and see if we could see one. So sure enough, 2 weeks later, we took everything up onto the roof of the house, blankets, pillows, binoculars, you know, a film camera, tape recorder, flashlight, you name it. Pad of paper and a pen, right? And everything we took up there. We were up there for maybe 30 minutes and nothing. And it was cold. This was in like March or April of 1966. And I said to my friend, I says, you know, I don't think we're gonna, and as I said the word see, is that we're gonna see anything. All of a sudden, hundreds of lights came from the north and went right across the sky to the south in like a second, second and a half. And I thought, that's not anything that I know of. It's not birds, it's not meteorites. It's just, it just seemed like a whole flotilla of things, but it seemed to be way up in the sky, like we're talking out in the stars, right? And we're looking at each other kind of spellbound, and literally 30 seconds later, this whole thing repeated itself, only from the south going to the north.
Wow.
So we climbed down the antenna and raced across to his place where my folks were having coffee with his folks. And we were so excited to tell him about this after what had happened 2 weeks before at the church.
Yeah.
They didn't even hear about it. So we just went back to my place and turned on the TV and watched Star Trek. So,
Wow.
but, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say that's kind of what, when I got kind of introduced by that story, as a producer, Rob told me these two stories, in the, I think it was about the summer of 2014.
Yeah.
And the first story was fantastic.
Mark, let's just say that we were doing movies together.
Yeah,
you and I had done some movies together for a few years, and I had told you the story during the filming of a movie on when the actors were getting ready.
That's right.
And you go ahead and continue, Mark.
No. It was fascinating because this had happened to Rob at that point almost 50 years ago. So it was really interesting for me because he told the first story, and I was like, oh, cool. I remember watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind when I was like 9 years old. And I was into that stuff, but it seemed, and not in a bad way, the first story was very classic. Very classic story. Seeing an object, people see the object. It's really interesting. So I was like, oh, cool, great story, Rob. You know what I mean? That's cool. But then he told me the second story and about going onto the roof of his parents' house and the creating the makeshift sky watching opportunity with the compass and the walkie-talkies and the pad of paper. And that touched my heart. I was like, that's adorable. You know what I mean? To be like two kids on a roof with the full intention. And this was the thing that just would not leave my head for the entire summer of 2014. It was like, wow, that boy went up onto that roof wanting to make contact. Like he wanted to, he intended to. And I've never met anybody in my lifetime, well, before this, who literally would say, it's dead of night, I'm gonna go up on my roof and I wanna make contact. So that got in my head, and I never told Rob, but I went off and I started researching people around the world who wanted to make contact, the intention of it. I had never heard of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. I'd never heard of that. I didn't know about that. I didn't even know there were 7 classifications of Close Encounters. I just knew number 3, right? Because of the movie. So I didn't know the rest. And then I looked into number 5 and I was like, wow, bilateral, unilateral communication with extraterrestrials and UFOs. That's really interesting. And then I started to message people, message people from Europe and from Australia and all these different South America, all these different places of the world. And it was really fascinating to me. And then I came back to him, and we laugh about this now, but I came back to him and I said, Rob, this is kind of happening all over the world. Maybe when you were on the rooftop of your parents' house, you actually made contact. Like you were putting the intention out through your mind, through your consciousness. You raised your vibrations, you got your energies to a certain level, and that's why they showed themselves to you. And that, being his age and being very open-hearted, open-minded to it, made it happen. And he's like, really, do you think so? And I said, it's happening all over the world. I said, I'm reading about this all over the world. And he said, well, what do you think we should do? He says, and then we kind of both said it at the same time. I think it's like, maybe we should go and meet people and see if we can do this. And I said, yeah, I want to do it. And then I said, you can pay for it, Rob. And he was like, okay. So that's kind of how it happened. It just sort of like, and then we just started, I think it was February of 2015. It was 5 years ago, literally 5 years ago. And we did it classic style. I won't get into all that, Grant, but I mean, because there's like a volume of material, like we spent 5 years doing it. But, we started off going to Area 51 and turned it into a road trip. We went from Area 51, we drove to Phoenix, talked to somebody who had experienced the Phoenix lights, went from there to California, talked to people in California. And I think Rob can attest to this. You just become addicted to it. you everything, it's like a puzzle, it's like you're putting a puzzle piece in, you're learning something, you're meeting people, suddenly we're meeting experts and we're talking to people who'd had more experiences, and you're adding, and it's like every camera, you've seen our cameras, every camera that's added is literally represents about 6 months in. It's like, okay, this camera represented from this to here, this camera represented the next 6 months, because you would just go, I wonder what can happen, and then suddenly Rob would say, my last little piece was, I want to get a thermal camera. I want to be able to see something that you can't see with the eye. Well, suddenly, like as you mentioned, Grant, you understand and have an invested interest in synchronicities. Yeah. And we found ourselves suddenly with this thermal camera at the edge of the Irish Sea, looking out onto the water, and what appears? An object that does not appear in any optical camera. Rob's tracking this thing with a thermal camera for the very first time. And there's just an understanding between Rob and I and everybody that's been involved with the Making Contact project over the years that these synchronicities are for a reason.
Well, yes, and Grant, what we have found is, although I've got all this high-tech equipment, and lugging it around the world. We've been to like 15 countries now.
Wow.
And over the last 5 years. And unfortunately, we had to cancel Argentina and Bolivia recently because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
We were just about ready to get on the plane to go to that. But what we found is the lights in the sky, that only gets you started.
Yeah.
Okay, that gets your attention. We've actually found there's way more of what you might call high strangeness. We call it cool high strangeness that happens around you, with you, and it's different things that have happened. And, one of the more exciting things that's happened is this whole story around the check. And Marcus, do you want me to tell that story now?
Yeah, this is a story that just blew me away when I heard this story. I just couldn't believe this. It's just wild. And you got the evidence too.
We have the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were going on an expedition to Australia. And I guess we were going there for about 3 weeks. This is the first time we went. And there were three of us. There was Marcus, there was Liz, and there was myself.
Okay.
And Liz had to pay her rent before she left, her rent for her apartment in Toronto before she left. So she wrote out a check for her rent, and we were going to be in Australia over the March 1st period. So we were leaving in February, around the end of February. And this was what, 2015 or something?
17, Rob, 2017.
Okay, and she, she's got a good relationship with her ex because they shared two boys. And so she asked her ex, if I leave you the check, will you go into my apartment and get it and take it down to the landlord? He has a key to her apartment because they share the boys. Sometimes the boys are home early from school before Liz would be home, and the father there would be, meeting the boys and so on. So he had a key to her apartment to deal with the boys and so on. But anyway, she left the check in the top dresser drawer, and she asked him, would you go in and take it down to the landlord on March 1st? He said, no problem. So March 1st, we're down in Australia. He goes in and he opens up the dresser drawer, takes the check out of the checkbook. He tore it out of the checkbook physically. He goes down to the landlord, who's an older gentleman, who is not computer savvy. I don't even think he can do much more than just talk on a cell phone. He doesn't text or anything.
He's in his late 70s.
No emails, no nothing.
Yeah.
But anyway, he gives the landlord the check, and the landlord writes 203 on it because that's the apartment number that Liz was in. And he takes the check and he writes it in his register. Okay, and then Liz's ex leaves. So all's fine, we're in Australia, and Liz is waiting for the check to go through the account. She's watching on her app. And finally, I guess it was around the 10th of March, it went through she saw it on her app, and she saw a screenshot of the scanned check having gone through the account. It appeared right in her app. So that's great. She was happy that her rent was paid. We continue on with our expedition. We get back from the expedition, and she happens to go in her top dresser drawer to take the checkbook out to write other checks for other utilities and so on. And Grant, what do you think was still in the checkbook?
The check, yeah.
Now, right at that moment when that happened, Marcus and I were waiting at the airport to go to Norway to another expedition to be with Erling Strand, you know, the Heston Lights.
Yeah.
And Liz is just blown away. And I think, Marcus, this is where I'll let you pick up the story.
You
Yeah,
got the check on the screen there now. That's the one that's still in the checkbook, right?
still to today, Grant. It's still in the checkbook, completely intact, completely intact. And so, in a brief summary, we get the call in the airport, and Liz says to me, Marcus, I got to talk to you about something. This is really strange. And I said, well, what's going on? She goes, the check, the check that was to pay my rent. I said, she goes, I still have it. And I said, what? What are you talking about? I said, what are you telling me? Your rent didn't get paid? Like, that's the first thing, right? That pops to your head, like in a normal kind of way. And she goes, no, I'm looking at my phone. I'm looking at the printout of the, the scan of the check. It's gone through. It's gone through the whole system. I'm seeing the scan front and back. I said, well, okay. And she goes, Marcus, the check is still in my checkbook. And I said, how's that? I said, I don't get that. I said, how's that possible? And I said, did you talk to your ex? And she said, yeah, Marcus, I called him. I asked him if he took, and he said, yes, I came, got the check, took it to the landlord. And he goes, and I said, so then I told Rob right away in Norway. I said, Rob, this is really strange. I said, we're here, but this is happening to Liz back in Canada. We're in Norway. And he goes, and of course, Rob, being Rob, starts to do the machine starts working, right? It's like, well, let's put it together. Like, he goes, well, have her take a picture of the checkbook, have her take a picture of the perforations, have her take a check, pictures of everything to show what it is. And I said, okay, so she did. And then while we were in Norway, in a very short sentence, she starts sending us these scans and pictures that she's taking at home, and she's sending us all the different things from the bank. So of course, Rob and I are like, we're in Norway, but we're fascinated by this, right? It's an unbelievable event. And Rob is pointing out those really particular things. He's like, well, look on the original check, there is no number. Like in the scan, you see her apartment number in the right-hand corner of the check because the landlord had written down her apartment number.
Yes, Grant, the check on the screen there, you see where Marcus has the red arrow on the bottom of the right-hand side of the check. You see there's nothing written beside there. The landlord took that check and he wrote 203 under the signature line. So on the copy that went through the bank, you see the number 203. Yet in the check that is still in the book, the 203 is not on it. It doesn't show up because it hasn't happened yet.
And Rob, sorry to interrupt, we actually we had a guy who specializes in forensics, because we went through the first original tests of taking the scan, taking the check in the checkbook, doing a photocopy, putting it up on glass, just literally putting on glass and putting them on top of each other. And we're like, these are identical, but hey, let's go one step further. We're not specialists. We're not forensics people. So we talked to a guy who knows forensics, and he looked at it. He literally said the same thing. He said, these are identical. And then he looked at us and went, what in the world are you showing me? Because he did not get it. He's like, you're saying that this check went through a banking system, stamped, even, hey, Rob, right on the back, stamped on the back, wet stamped by the bank on the back. And Liz and I went to the bank and said to the teller, what's your process? Oh yeah, we showed them. She said, oh no, that's a wet stamp. He would bring the check in and we'd cash it and stamp it. I said, he'd have to be here to do that, right? You'd have to wet stamp the back of that check. She goes, oh yeah, you'd have to physically show up and come with a physical check and we would stamp it and take it back. So we realized that all of these things, the forensics guy matching with the wet stamp, matching with the fact that the number wasn't there, but it's in the original, but it's not on the other. it's still to today, it's still something that just boggles our minds.
Many people, Grant, have said, "Oh, your landlord took a picture of the check and deposited it." But the debunking part of that is when you turn the check over, or at least the scanned check, and you see the back, as Marcus said, there's the wet stamps from the teller. So the landlord had to take the actual original check, the physical paper original, into the bank to make the deposit. And the teller herself, with her stamp, stamped the back of it from an ink pad. And that continued on. And when you're at the bank, they run it through the scanner right in front of you. So the teller would have scanned it right there and then in front of the depositor, in front of the landlord. And that is the copy that we have. The bank even was so good to make us a nice printout copy of the check and gave a letter saying that this is the actual legal copy of the check that was deposited.
Fantastic.
But how is it possible that the paper check, the original, is still untouched in the checkbook, and yet it went through the whole banking system?
Wow. Desta, can you flip to one of the check with the what do they call it, with this wet stamp on the back?
Yeah, there
we go.
There you
and
go.
Now in the upper part, you can see that's the back of the check. It even says the word back of check.
Yeah.
And on the right-hand side, you see the stamp, deposit to the credit of. The teller would have stamped that and hand wrote those numbers. And then she also wrote on the left, credit, what does it say? Deposit only to the credit of, and stamp that. And then when it was scanned, that's where it says capturing branch. That's when it was actually scanned in. And then on the left-hand side, you see the front of the check, and you can see the number 203 written on there. That's what the landlord wrote on the original check when he took it from Liz's ex in his apartment and took the rent that day.
There you go.
Right there, yes.
Wow.
And yet you look at the original check, it's still in the book. It does not have 203 written on it, because that's kind of like, there's a timeline here that is split. Or Grant, I know you've got other words to describe what happened, and maybe why don't we turn to you and ask you a couple questions here.
Okay, well, first give me your theory, because you were telling me the theory of because you were going across time zones, and you were talking about this, your idea about what you thought might have happened in terms of, it's pretty weird theory, but.
Okay, let me just find my little list. Now, when Liz was telling us all about this, we were at the boarding waiting for her to get on the plane to Norway. And then, she continued to look into it. And when we landed in Norway, that's when she started sending us copies of what her bank account showed, the copy of the check having gone through the system. Marcus and I were searching on the internet and trying to understand about timelines and split timelines and all these different things. And even Erling Strand himself,
Yes.
when we showed him what had happened, because we ran right into him the very next day and we told him the story, he didn't even raise his eyebrows. Well, I've got my own story to tell, and I'll tell that one really quick.
Yeah.
In his little town in Norway, the local paper ran some kind of story, and to back up the story, there was a picture of the street that the story had to do with, and it showed, it was like it showed 3 houses on the street. When the story appeared in the paper, people began calling into the paper to complain that what is this, a tabloid paper? You guys are printing false pictures here. This is not what the street looks like. And they're saying, well, but this is what our photographer took. This is the picture of the street that goes with the story. And they're saying, no, it's not. Send your photographer out again. So the photographer goes back out again, and instead of 3 houses on the street, now there's only 2.
Wow.
So Erling had that happen himself, okay, in his little town where he lives in. We read many stories on the internet of people, for example, a lady going into Walmart, maybe they have t-shirts, on sale or something, and there's maybe 5 different colors. There's like red, purple, green, black, yellow, and she buys the red one. She likes them all. Which one will I take? Well, I'll take the red one. She goes up to the cashier. She pays for it. She gets it home. She opens up the bag, and guess what? It's the black one that's in the bag. And they're like, well, I guess, you know,
I've got
they
one,
switched.
Rob. Remember that really cool one about the magazine? This is a quick one, but a guy in a magazine, really quickly, he opened up a magazine, saw a telephone number on a website, and he's like, oh, I need that. I'm going to call this person up. And he called the person up, and she's like, and he gives her the name of the business, and he says, I was just in this magazine, and I saw your telephone number and website. And this is a very popular one on the internet. And she goes, and she literally said to him, yes, I've registered my website, but I'm not public yet. Like she goes, I'm not online. This is a business I just started up. You're talking to me like it's 6 months from now. Right. And we I remember that one. We saw that one in Norway, and we were like, that could have very well happened with us. While we were in Australia, this is one of our theories, Grant, right? I mean, you create theories. I mean, we're human, right? We create theories. We don't base it on a lot, but we base it on kind of our own intellect. And that was our feeling, was maybe when we went to Australia, because Rob had a very prolific experience. We don't need to talk entirely about that. We had very prolific contact experience in Australia. And so there was this kind of this understanding that maybe we did that. You know what I mean? Maybe we crossed over a line, you know, and when we and maybe while we were in Australia, all of this kind of happened with the with the check and the processing of that check. But then the timeline's kind of, I don't know how you'd explain it, right? I don't know quantum physics, but something happened.
Okay, so Grant was asking me about my different things that I had on a list. I went through the list with him. Here it is here. So, you know, real quickly, you know, people were kind of jealous of us, professionally jealous that we had this event happen. They're kind of like, how come you guys had such a profound event happen? We've never had anything like this. Well, Brent, not only have we had that happen, but last summer we had a second event happen.
Wow.
Okay, and I told you about that, I believe. And we were on our way to San Francisco, and actually continuing there to, where was it, Mount Shasta?
Mount Shasta, Rob, yeah.
Now, I was coming in from Greece. I had just been on a holiday to Greece. I had just flown into Toronto, waited there 5 hours, and then flew on to San Francisco with Marcus and Liz. I met them in Toronto. We flew on. Okay. Now, when we got to San Francisco, because we had to switch to another plane going somewhere else near Mount Shasta, when we were waiting there, our incoming plane that we were going to catch leaving San Francisco was late. And this was over the lunch hour. And I said to everybody, like, I hope they're going to give us vouchers for lunch. Because we're going to be late.
Nervous, yeah. Go ahead.
Right, you remember now.
Yeah, I remember your story now, yeah.
So I went up to the lady at the counter and I says, you know, we're kind of going to be late here and we're needing lunch. And she said, well, there's no problem. If the plane is 4 hours late, we'll automatically issue everybody vouchers if they ask, right?
Yeah.
So we're counting down the time as they kept announcing it was going to be later and later. I was out into the mall area of the airport, seeing what was in the stores and so on. And Liz and Mark were back at the gate. They came on the speaker and announced for all those on this flight, it's now 4 hours late, therefore we qualify for vouchers. And if you'd like a lunch voucher of $10 American, come up to the counter, we'll issue you one. So I didn't know this at the time, but Liz went up and got hers. Okay, I was out in the mall area and I heard that and I dropped everything and I went back. I thought there's gonna be a big lineup. I'll just go straight back. So I go back to the counter, and since I bought the tickets for everybody, I asked for the group's vouchers. So she said, no problem. So she printed up 3 vouchers for Marcus, Liz, and myself. Now, Marcus and Liz were right there because Liz had just gotten her voucher, but I didn't know that. And I turned to Liz and Marcus and I said, here's your vouchers, guys. Liz says, I already have one. I just got one. I said, well, now you got 2. So she had 2 vouchers of $10 each. And I gave Marcus his voucher. So then Liz went ahead and, you know, she went and spent $20 on I forget what it was, chicken salad and a drink or something like that. It came to $20.10. I went and bought mine. Everybody was happy. Mark had his lunch. So we were now back at the boarding and they were announcing that the plane was getting ready to go. Everybody get ready in the boarding area. And I said, does everybody have their boarding passes? So Liz reaches in her purse, and what is there right next to the boarding pass?
The vouchers, yeah.
Vouchers, Grant. And we took a double take, and now we have some of this on film, and we have some pictures of this. But Liz looked at them, and she says, "Oh, I'm going to spend these also." And I said, "Don't you dare." First of all, I wanted to keep a record of these. But second, I thought, if we go ahead and spend those two and they're the same number, I could get in trouble. I'm the guy that bought the tickets. This could be considered a fraud, especially if it's the same number, and we could get into trouble over this. I know it's not a lot of money, but it's technically a fraud if we respend them again. And, but we looked at them, and Liz, and I said, Marcus says, why don't you go back and see if the originals that you cashed in are still at the cashier? So Liz and Marcus went back there, but by that time, the shift had changed, and they had cleared the cash drawer, so we couldn't get a copy of it. But once again, we have the original vouchers. Now, when Liz cashed in her vouchers, she had to surrender them. And the lady took a yellow magic marker and highlighted the amount and put them in the drawer. So we now drew a comparison between this incident and the check incident. And I have my little list here. Okay, so this is a comparison between the voucher and the check. Number one, there was a middle person involved, and in both cases, male. Okay. Now, the time difference between the two was March 1st, 2017. That was the check incident in Australia. June 1st, 2019. So both were on the 1st of a month. Okay, the full name was in the check and in the voucher. So Liz's full name, all her names. She's from Latin America, so she has 4 names. And they were on both the check and the voucher. We were, in both cases, Grant, traveling to an ET expedition. The first one was Australia, where we're meeting up with people, CE-5 type stuff. The second one, same thing, meeting up with CE-5 to Mount Shasta. The next one, now this one's interesting. In both cases, we were traveling a long distance against the rotation of the Earth. That one piques my interest a little bit because of physics and angular momentum and all these things about spinning. And, you know, I'm not a physicist, but I hear physicists talk about these kind of things. So that would be an interesting one to look into. The person cashing the check or the voucher wrote something on the paper, okay, in both cases. Now, in this next one, number 7, at least one of the 3 was traveling halfway around the world. Okay, so we were traveling halfway, all 3 of us were traveling halfway around the world to Australia. And in the second case with the voucher, I was traveling halfway around the world, all the way from Greece, all the way around the world to Australia. So at least one person, both times, was traveling halfway around the world. Here's the next one, number 8. We could not recover the original that was cashed or redeemed. Could not get it back. All we could do was get a copy. Because in Canada, once they scan it, they have to keep it legally in the bank where you made the deposit of the check. They keep it there for 5 to 7 days, and then it's destroyed. You know, that may be different in other countries, but here in Canada, and the scanned copy of the check is legal. Now this one was just with the voucher. Why is it that United Airlines issued a second voucher for Liz? You would think with the modern computer systems and accounting, once a passenger has been issued a voucher, that's it. The system would say, I'm sorry, it has been issued to her. So that's an anomaly within an anomaly, okay? Both are related to an exchange of value. There's value, like there's monetary value there. Number 11, both times we're super tired. The rational mind is asleep. So maybe it's the right brain, don't know. In both cases, a change of 3 or more time zones. Okay, number 13, we were going to an event that was planned in advance. So the event is in our mind. It's circulating around in our mind. You're looking forward to something. There's expectations of what you're going to do, why you're going there, and it's to connect with ETs. Okay, now here's an interesting one. 822 days apart, the two incidents or the two events, which is 411 twice. 411 is, the number for information, 411. Don't know if it means anything, but for those that look at numbers, it's possible there's something there. And in each time, Liz was the recipient of the item. Liz was the recipient of the item. So there was 15 things common between the check and the voucher.
Can I ask if Liz, is she an experiencer?
Marcus?
No, Liz.
No, but I'll let Marcus answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, Liz has been involved with this project since late 2016. An integral part of when we went to Peru, our original trip to Peru, we got to meet Sixto Paz Wells.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a very, very prolific experience. So, and Liz helped unbelievably with that, like connecting all of those, connecting us with him. And, we knew about him, we'd researched him, but she was very, very integral with that. I wouldn't want to speak on her behalf, but I feel that she has had she has a connection to this. Like we can't deny that. When this check incident happened, when the voucher incident happened, plus a series of other different things, synchronicities and different things that have happened over the last 2.5, 3 years, there is some commonality there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We just can't pretend to know what that commonality is. We can't. But we had some really big things happen in the beach in Peru, Playa Yaya, that she was an integral part of. Same with Australia, same with other places that we've gone. She's been a part of it. She's had those direct experiences right along with us. So, anything else would be a theory, right? We would just create a theory on it.
But you want my theory?
Go ahead.
One of the things, if you interview Desta about this, Desta's kind of an expert on the Mandela effect. This idea that all these things keep changing, where you look back at a certain thing and it didn't happen and it was spelt different 20 years ago or whatever. That was the one. Yvonne Smith wrote a book called The Chosen. And that's why I asked who's the experiencer, because it seems to follow around the experiencers. And I have a theory. I've given a lecture a couple times. It's called the theory of wow. Have you ever heard that theory? Where I say, basically, they're not doing anything. They're just getting your attention. So you guys are doing films, and they go, "Oh, this will be good. We're going to give these guys something to film." Because when I had my first event, as I said, it started in February of 1975, and I said, "Let's go out and see what's going on." And we didn't go. And then the local TV station gets the film of this thing jumping off the ground. And what had happened was the night before they got the film, they had almost got it, but they couldn't get it. And they were all booking overtime. And they went, and the assistant news producer at CKY TV said, "This is garbage. Nobody's ever going out again. I'm not paying no more overtime. You guys want to do this stupid flying saucer thing, you can go on your own time." So they put a crew together, but the crew it was just volunteer guys, and they didn't have a cameraman. So they took a film editor out of the TV station, and he had the old big cameras of the 1970s. He goes out with the camera. He never shot a camera before in his life. And they're on the road, and I interviewed all these guys, and they told me that the film came out backwards. So it jumped in the air, and then it flew across the sky, and they maintained before it was edited, it went across the sky and then jumped in the air. And I said, that's impossible. And the guy was a CBC reporter, national reporter. When I interviewed him, he said, "I know, I'm telling you, I saw the film before. That's how it came out of the film." And when I interviewed the guy who was doing the film, he said, they're down the road, and they could see this thing on the ground, and they were trying to surround this thing. It was sitting on the ground. They had a bunch of pilots, and there was 2 cars went around. And he said, I could see this thing, and it was in the frame, and it was glowing up, and it was glowing down. And he said, I knew they didn't get anything the night before, so I was going to try to make sure I got something on film. So he said, the next time this thing glows up, I'm going to shoot. And he said, as this thing started to glow up, he shot the camera and the thing jumped in the air, almost like the UFO was saying, "Are you ready to shoot? Get ready, I'm going to jump." And he pushed, and then I'm thinking 35 years later, I'm going, that wasn't chance. That was planned, because they needed me to go out, because I never would have gone out, because unless they got the CKY film, I never would have gone out, because I had no interest in UFOs. So I had this whole thing about the theory of wow, like for example, you describe your sighting, where, same with me, where you're there, and it's almost like you're the chosen, like Yvonne Smith calls the chosen. So they say, okay, Rob is here, and he's seeing us, and turn up the lights. He can't see us. Turn up the lights. And you're sort of like, you're in this plan. You're one of the chosen ones that's going to put out the message to them. Like, why do UFOs have lights on them? We don't have lights on our planes. You don't need lights on a UFO. They have the lights so you can see them. And so I go through all these different things, whether it's cattle mutilations. Why do they take all the blood out of the cow? So you'll take pictures. So you'll go, wow, what is going on here? Or when they come back the second day, they say, oh, there he is. Fly by, and then they say, oh, look at the look on his face. Let's do it the other way. It's coming the other way. And they come across, and you see all this stuff, and you get sort of wound up in this thing, and you become the messenger. And they give you these really weird things, these synchronicities, and that's because you can't let go of it. And you go to the next thing. And the other thing is the time, the thing where in physics now is believed that there really is no time and space. It's all our mind that's creating it. So I interviewed a couple of people. Barbara Lamb was one. So Barbara Lamb does these regressions, and she's got people on the table in the ship. And then she says to them, I try to distract them because they're all fearful and what's going on or whatever. So she actually asked them questions to get them away from thinking about what's going on. And she told me the story. And I never got this thing about time and space until she said that. She said, I said to the one person, I said, do you know what they're doing to you? And the person goes, no, I don't know what they're doing. And she says, well, why don't you ask them? And then there's this long pause, and then the person says, they're looking at my kidney. They're saying there's something wrong with my kidney. I should go to the doctor. There's something wrong with my kidney. Now, that didn't happen in the first event. It's almost like the double thing where you can go back to that time. Or the other one, we just interviewed Sherry Wild, who now they're going to do a 3-year or a 6-part series in TV about her experience. And she's regressed by the Center for UFO Studies, their top regression guy. He's apparently one of the top guys in the United States. And she described the same thing. She said, when he had me in the regression, I'm on the road when I'm 18 years old. And then he says to me, he says, what time is it? She says, I don't know what time it is. I didn't look at my watch. And he said, well, look at your watch. And she looked at her watch. She said, it's like 10 after 10. And she said, that did not happen the first event. Then he said, what's the street sign say? And she goes, I didn't look at the street sign. He says, well, go and take a look and look at the street sign. And she's back in real time. And the event that you think is written in stone is happening again, and it's changing. This whole thing is coming across. And then the last example I'll give you is this thing about the weird thing. I'm now getting into physical mediums. These guys are there's so many parallels to UFOs. So there's a guy in Winnipeg here who catches orbs. He's got, like you guys, this stuff is going on. He's filming all this stuff, and he's just sort of, and he has the one where it actually goes into his body. He films this orb going into his body, and he has this big tumor on the back of his neck, and it disappears at that moment. And so he's taking these films. And when I saw the physical mediums, there's a guy by the name of David Thompson, who's a physical medium. And what they do is they put him in a chair, and they tie strap him down to the chair, and they gag him, and they do all this kind of stuff. And he's in there, and he has a cardigan sweater on. And what they do is they tie strap the cardigan sweater to the chair. Because what happens in a lot of the events he has, when the seance is over, he's outside the box, and his cardigan sweater is inside out and backwards. So the guy that's doing the orbs in Winnipeg, I said, Jim, you told me you had a couple of experiences where you woke up in bed and your shirt was inside out and backwards. And he goes, yeah, that happened. And it's the same event. And what it is, like, why would, because the idea before was, well, the aliens are stupid. They can't even put your clothes on right. But if you put the shirt on inside out and backwards, you're going, no, that's not a dream. I didn't put my shirt in, and it's got a stain on it. And so that's why I think that they're doing that. So they're sort of like, you're their spokesman. They're like the chosen, like the Yvonne Smith, that because you're the film guys, they're doing these really weird things so you can put it out. And all they want people to know is, this isn't us. There's something weird going on, like the metals. They dropped the metals, and people look at the metal. Oh, maybe we're going to build a flying saucer out of this metal. And they're dropping it, and it's like, well, they don't come across the galaxy, and then little pieces start falling off the flying saucer. They're dropping this stuff. They're actually getting people, and people are looking at the metal, looking at UFO photographs, and they just want everybody to know something's going on. We're not alone, and you get into it, and you start putting the pieces together, and you try to figure it out, and you're basically giving their message. Or like Sherry Wild, her kids actually, one of her daughters actually got a restraining order to stop her from publishing the book, and she fought against this. And the being, she put the book away. She said, no, I'm not going to lose my family. And they said, no, you got to do this. And so she did the book. And she said, they basically gave her the book. And then she's driving down the street one day, and there's a 3D holographic screen in front of her. And she's looking, she's going, I'm driving. Like, what are you doing? And she pulls off the road. She said, what are you showing me the screen for? And they said, this is the first scene to your movie. And now she's got this 6-part series going to be done in Hollywood on her movie. And that's the thing. So I see this chosen thing that you guys are the messenger, and they make all these weird things. Like you have the other one, the Synchronicity story. You got to tell me about this thing with the license plates. Like, why did they do these weird things with the license plates? Because it gets you going and you go like, wow, and you put it out and everybody else goes, wow. And that's all they're doing is they're making everybody go, wow, what's going on here? Like, we're not alone. Something's going on. There's something outside the physical world, and everybody tries to figure it together. Because if they come to you and say, we're here to bring you freedom and democracy, Jesus and McDonald's, you're going to go like, get out of here, get lost. It has to be indirect, where you decide that, oh yeah, this is for real, and you're the one carrying the message. They're not directly, they're doing it indirectly through people like you. So I would see you as the chosen people who they've elected to show really weird things to, so they can get out the message that we're not alone.
You know, I can jump in here a little bit for you as far as the synchronicities. I can tell you, Grant, if you'd like, the license plate story.
Yeah. That's a fascinating story.
Because we've had it happen twice, you know, and we cannot deny the circumstances behind either one of them. Way too random. We traveled to Scotland. Would have been the summer of 2015. And I had been in contact with a gentleman that was John Gillis, who's part of the British Aerial Investigation Society. And he, 25-year skywatcher and great guy. And he had a very intensive story to tell us about his experience with Men in Black. You know, he said, he goes, I know this is what they call them. He goes, I don't know what that is entirely, but we were at this, it's like a castle or something, Rob, wasn't it? Like a church or a castle in Scotland. And he was telling us about how, in a nutshell, that he was looking out his window and he saw what he thought was a meteor, but it wasn't acting like a meteor at all. It was very bright. And he watched it go behind this church or castle. We filmed there intensively, got a lot of awesome material there. And he told us how he went there with his dog. And, you know, his dog's very sensitive to everything around him. You know, the dog will bark at a squirrel, at anything that comes near him. And they were walking the path towards where he felt that the meteorite had landed. And I always say the same thing about anybody that tells us a story. When that person has no agenda, like no agenda. Have they written any books? No. Have they appeared in any movies? No. In their entire 25-year period of time, John wasn't looking for anything other than to tell his story. And, you know, he told his story. And he said, I was on the path and I watched, I looked, and I heard nothing. He said, all I remember is suddenly a figure of a man passing in front of me. My dog didn't make a sound. He passed in front of me like 1.5 feet away from my face. And he goes, I remember looking into his eyes. The first thing I saw was his blue eyes. And he said, and I quote, it was like looking into life itself.
Wow.
He said this guy's eyes were the bluest of blue. He had a tattoo. He actually drew the tattoo for us. He had a tattoo on his neck. His dog didn't make a peep before, during, or after.
Yeah.
And he said that's what messed with his mind, was the fact that his dog barks at his friends, people, relatives, anything. You know, his dog is like, don't get near me. This guy got right up on us. So he described that, Men in Black. It was a whole day, you know, Rob remembers, whole day about Men in Black. So what happens that night? We just go back to a random area in Scotland. You know, I think we're in the Edinburgh area. And we go to this, we decide we want to get some food, driving street. You know, no sense of rhythm or anything, just random. We park, we stop, we're talking. And suddenly, I believe it was you, Rob, actually, said, look what's on the license plate ahead of us. And we look at the license plate ahead of us. And what are the first 3 letters of the license plate? M-I-B.
Men in Black.
So that played with us. That was the first time, too, that synchronicity had ever happened. We're laughing, like, what are the chances of that? That's crazy. Oh, my gosh. You know, our minds are blown by it. How do you spend a whole day with a guy talking about the MIB and see that license plate? So to follow that up, the next summer, we go to Australia, and we are with a group that we know we're meeting up with a group and we're going to do CE-5. We're going to do the CE-5 protocols, close encounters of fifth kind protocols. We go to a car rental place when we get off the plane, and we had a car that we were to rent. We knew, but they couldn't get us in that car. Wasn't that right, Rob? They couldn't get us in that one, or it wasn't going to be big enough. Something to that effect. So we had to get another car.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't even think about checking the license plate. I mean, you're packing your stuff in, right? You're not even thinking about that. We go out to the site where we're going to be, and we're doing stuff. And then that night, I have this awesome night vision footage of it. We're all sitting around the car and we're packing our stuff up. And the guy that we're with goes, "Your license plate is hilarious." And we go, "What?" He goes, look at the first three letters on your license plate, your rental car license plate. CE-5. So when it happens twice, you just go, that's communication. That's the first thing that comes into our head. Like what you just said, Grant, about, you know, we would never call ourselves the chosen, but we understand your theory on it. It seems as though once they know that you have an acceptance of the message, an acceptance of their presence, they start to kind of, we call it the trickster element. You know, we call it this trickster element, this fun element of playing with you, sending you little signs. We've had, oh man, I think we wrote down, 25, Rob? I think we were at 25. Wow. You know, just moments where we would go, people that knew my first name in an airport, you know, come up to me and say my name to my face, that knew my birth name. And I'm like, how do you know my birth name? You know, like all these different things. Rob's had it happen so many different times too. Things that have happened that we could tell you, you know, there'd be too much time now, Grant, but so many of them. And we just go, yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
I say I've got a list of about 30 or more.
Yeah, 30
maybe
more.
We should come back to the check, because we're really, Grant, we're really fascinated why you've chosen to put our story about the check in your book. And first of all, tell us about your book. And then second of all, tell us why you want to put the check story in your book.
I look at it as like Mark was talking about, the trickster thing. So what happens to me, and I've had these synchronicities as well. So this is how it happens with me. I'm at LAX airport and I'm with Ray Hernandez, who is the Edgar Mitchell Foundation. When he had his event, and if you know his story, he has the event where his dog gets healed. This is March of 2012. Yeah. And I've told Ray this numerous times, and he seems to forget it all the time. But I said, do you realize that the week before I had my download experience with the consciousness thing, when I moved from government documents, and I suddenly said, oh, this is a waste of time. Consciousness is how this thing is. It's all got to do with consciousness. His was the week after. Chris Bledsoe, if you're familiar with his story, high-level contactee, has this encounter with the Lady of Light the same time, either the same day or within a couple of days. And so you see this connection. So Ray and I are talking about, we're at LAX airport. We're waiting for an Uber to come. And first fails. And it's like, how do they not know how to get to gate 4 or to terminal 4? And there was 3 different Ubers. It was one, and then the other guy couldn't make it. And the other guy could. So Ray and I are standing there talking for about 40 minutes, waiting for this Uber to come. And then, so I said to him, because they run with all the experiencers, and I say the experiencers are the people who have all the weird stuff happening around them, and you got to listen to these people. They're in contact like you. They've got some sort of contact connection with that phenomena, and it's helping them, and it's giving them stuff, and they're out doing stuff. So there's 3,200 in their first survey. They did the major survey where they ask all these questions about the type of alien, and you know, did you remember everything in the universe or know everything in the universe or get downloads and stuff like that. So I said to Ray, I said, okay, you got 3,200 guys. Who's the best guy you got? And he said, oh, Alberto. Well, Alberto's the best guy. And he's got these real advanced physics downloads. And I think he's a clinical psychologist. And then he says, and he's got these apports that are falling in his room. And I said, apports, what the heck's that? And he said, oh, there's things. And he's, yeah, they're called apports.
Sorry,
So
can you explain what?
Okay, so the apport it comes out of like almost like it happens a lot in physical mediumship. So there'll be a seance and suddenly they'll make somebody give a sort of a say a polished stone or a metal or something, and the physical medium will make this. But this happens around experiencers all the time. So if you ever get around an experiencer and they're talking about their stuff, and you say, do you ever have anything fly around the room, or something fall out of the sky, or something disappeared and reappeared in another part of the house? And they go, oh yeah, and they go and get the whole collection of the stuff that they've got, and like dimes. Like a lot of people have the dimes appear, or if you've seen the guys from the Paranormal Rangers, when they gave their lecture, they were brought into a haunted building, and in one weekend they had 64 coins fall, all heads up, in one weekend. And they filmed this, and you never see them. They fall behind you, and you hear them falling, and you go, and there's another coin, whatever. So it was this whole thing about these apports, and this Alberto guy he had a whole collection of these things, and he had swords, and he had all sorts of stuff, and I'm going, really? So I said to him, I said, well, this is really, really weird. This is I never heard about this before. So what I do, and you get the synchronicity. So I said, I'm gonna check this thing out. So I go onto the internet, and I put in apport, and the first video comes up is Stanley Krippner, who was a big parapsychologist at Seabrook University, and he had been doing apports, stuff appearing around a psychic in Brazil. They'd taken in a crew, 95 things in the time that the university people were there had fallen, all different metals and pieces of rock and stuff like that, and they documented all this stuff. And then he says, so I had all that stuff, and then someone broke in my house and they stole them all. And he said, so what I did is I got some new ones, one from a shaman in the United States, and I can't remember what the other one. The other one is from this psychic in Brazil as well. And he said, so I decided that I wanted to make sure they were protected this time instead of getting stolen. So I didn't keep them in my house. I sent them to a university in Canada. I sent them to the University of Manitoba. And I'm going, wow. I mean, I worked there for 37 years. I'm going, what are the chances? I'm into apports, and suddenly there's a collection of these at my university. There's only 2 collections in the world. One is at Stanford University. The brother of the guy who started Stanford University had these apports coming. He was with this medium, and they're all at Stanford University in a collection. There's only 2 collections in the world, and one happens to be at my university. I'm going, I got to do this. I got to do this story. So then I started asking experiencers. So I'd say and I don't know if you heard the feather story. Desta was involved in the feather story. So I got this guy from Great Britain, and he's got all these photographs, low helicopters, 50 feet over his head, different types of helicopters, with a UFO in the photograph. And I'm going, and they wanted me to see his photographs. I said, well, I'm really not into photographs and stuff like that. Oh, he came all the way from Great Britain to see you because he knew there's a consciousness connection. Go out in his backyard, and he could make the thing appear, and he would take photographs of it. So I said, okay, I'll talk to the guy. So his name is Tony. So I said, Tony, come up to my room. I said, and I didn't talk about the photographs. I just said, when did it start? Do you have all this stuff? And then I said, oh, Tony, by the way, do you ever have anything sort of fall out of the sky or something like that, or appear and disappear? And he talks about the keys flying across the room. And then he says, oh, I had the feathers. And he starts telling this story of the feathers, that he wanted to come to America and he wanted a sign. So he went out in the backyard, and he says, this feather comes across. And it sits there, and he's looking at this thing. And then the next day, same thing, feather comes across, white feather. He said, just ordinary white feather. And it would sit above his head and then fall right at his feet. And like, what's the chances? 4 days in a row, feather fall right at his feet. So he tells his wife, he says, I got to go to Laughlin, Nevada. I got to meet this Grant Cameron. I'm in contact. There's some sort of contact. He says, Tony, there's feathers everywhere. Forget it. And then he said, he sort of left it, and he said, I've still got to go. And then he goes out in the backyard. He said, okay, if you want me to go, I need a sign. You got to help me with the wife. I mean, you can't make me go, but you can help the wife. Come on, get her to believe. And he said, this big feather, 2 feet long, dark, black, brown, comes, sits right above him, and he goes, oh, thank you. And the feather goes, and it flies off into the sky. And so he tells his wife, she still doesn't believe it. And then, so she's going to work. She works in London, England. She goes on the train. She says, okay, she knew it wasn't crazy because she's seen his photographs. And she said, so she says, okay, if this is for real, I want to see a feather. She goes walking out, and boom, feather falls right at her feet. And then she gets on the train, and now she's, as Tony says, she's having her experience. She's going like, wow. She gets off, and she says, well, there's never feathers on the London Bridge. I want a feather on the London Bridge. She's going across, she gets to the top, going down the other side of the London Bridge, boom, feather in front of her. And now she's really freaking out. So she goes back on the train back to where they live outside, an hour out of London. And she says, okay, I don't want a feather. I want a pile of feathers, a whole bunch of feathers. She says she gets to the train, gets off, door opens up, there's a bush there with hundreds of feathers in this bush. Now she's freaking out. And she goes to him and she says, okay, Tony, you can go to Laughlin. And he says, well, what changed? So she tells him this story. 2 days later, she's in her room and now she's into it. She's going, okay, she's working at home. The door is this far open. And she says, okay, I want to see another feather. And then she's saying, she's looking, and all of a sudden this comes up down the door in between the two patio doors, comes down, moves in, and lands right at her feet. And so when we went, all these people at Laughlin started having these feathers appear. And Steve Miro from England had them when all these guys were going on the car. And then Desta and I, to top it all off, we thought it was all over. So we leave Laughlin. We got this unbelievable story, all these feathers, people are having these. And Paula Harris comes out with a big giant feather shirt on the morning we're leaving. I'm going, Paula, you got a big feather shirt on. Oh, I bought it in Italy. And she's talking. So Desta and I we're in Tucson, and it follows us to Tucson. So we're at Tucson and we're at this old church, 200-year-old church. We're taking pictures, and Desta wants to go to the gift shop. So I go, okay, fine, we'll go to the gift shop. So she's looking around, and I see these big cards. They're about this big. And one has this, like an Aboriginal card, and the woman's holding this white feather. I go, oh, that's pretty cool. So then I get the card, and I'm photographing the card, and I put it down, and I see the next one, it's got a dream catcher with all these white feathers on this dream catcher. I go, oh, cool. Take this thing, because I don't want to buy it. I'm just photographing this thing. And I put the card down, and there's Desta standing with a white feather. And I said, get out of here. Says, yeah, she's waiting for me outside the gift shop. Down comes the feather and lands right on her right foot. So I got obsessed with this apport thing. So when I heard your story, I go, oh, this is the same thing. They're making stuff appear, disappear, and they're trying to get your attention because you can't leave it. You know what it's like. Once you have a UFO sighting, you're down the rabbit hole. And I remember people used to quit all the time. And they say, the guy quit. He's had enough. He's quitting. I go, no. Everybody comes back. You cannot, once you've seen it. So you can have you can hear other people's synchronicities, but when it happens to you, then you're down the rabbit hole. And that's all I think they're doing. So when I heard your feather story, and that's the synchronicity thing, because I have just bizarre synchronicities, just like off the chart things where you're going like, what is going on? And it's almost like you've got some sort of contact, and you just sort of go along with it and sort of assume that maybe they want me to do something, and assume that this stuff's going to happen. So I would say you guys are probably going to have a lot more bizarre things, because you were in Peru and you had almost every thing you do, you have stuff where something happens, where an event happens when the camera is there. And I think that's what they want. They want the message out, and you guys are the messengers. Same as I'm a messenger, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like I always call it a magical, wonderful world, because most people live lives of quiet desperation. They're just paying their bills. They just watch TV, and take their kids to soccer practice. And you and we're sitting here, and we've got like just bizarre stuff, almost like you're in touch with the universe. And if you look at the whole thing about, I'm a big Michael Newton fan about life between lives and all this kind of stuff, where if reincarnation is a fact, which I think it is, then you came into the world and you probably agreed to do something. And it's this idea that there's, like you'll hear a lot of experiencers say, I believe I'm them. They're my actual family, not my real family. They feel they're from someplace else. And there's this connection. And it may almost be the thing where before you were born, we were all born, we had a meeting. And we all said, okay, we're going to do this thing. And you guys are going to do the filming. And I'm going to do the apport books and all this kind of stuff. And it's this sort of agreement. And they're working through it. So if Dolores Cannon talks about that as well, the 3 waves that are coming in. They see people have agreed to come in to raise consciousness, so that what happens with the New York Times, you remember, because you guys have been in Rob has been in as long as I have, that in the 1970s, if you saw one UFO, you were crazy. But if you claimed you saw 2 UFOs, there's no way. It was a random event. You would just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet you see now that all this stuff is happening, and then you start to get the idea that the people that are involved in this thing are in there for a reason, that we may have actually agreed to do this kind of stuff.
Like you mentioned even at the beginning of the interview, Grant, about the Squamish orb, like the whole series of events that led up to that, it's just too much. Like we were there, we were supposed to meet up with another ufologist. We were supposed to, you're supposed to do all these different things. And suddenly we're at this place where we're just, okay, we're going to start here. And then you walk into a diner. We walked into like a diner or a convenience store. and just happened to talk to a woman across the counter about what we were there for. She says, I really got something I need to tell you. And then it's like, okay, here we go. You know, and I'm instantly like, can I film it? She says, well, I said, well, do you mind if I record your audio? I said, I won't use your video. Very respectful for that. And she's like, yeah. So she tells us a story about this different, you know, the Squamish chief, you know, in Vancouver, and how prolific it is, and how there have been, you know, very ancient, you know, very, very, very ancient, and how there have been sightings of orbs and different things. And we drove and drove and drove, and we got, you know, we were driving around and around and around, and it was all four of us. It was myself and Rob and Liz, and Breslin was a fourth member of that expedition. And we all said at the same time, like within the same, this is the spot. We have to be here. We don't know why. We don't need to know why. We just have to be here. And we were 8.5 hours, right, Rob? I think we were like 8.5 hours there. And, you know, we got in touch with that area. We got really in touch and connected to that area. And so when it happened, oh man, it was just mind blowing. You know, like I'm in the back of a van. I'm almost kind of in and out of a bit of sleep. Rob's at the cameras. He only has a chance to hit the one camera to get the night vision. But this thing just lit up like a star. Like it was just, and then of course it went behind the trees and it lit the trees up, and you hear the most authentic, oh, come out of Rob, because it's like, well, that's not the ISS, but we went back. And that's something we pride ourselves on as being in the field. I'm going to give us this little baby plug, because we don't rest on it and just say everything is something. We don't, you know, we know what satellites are. We know what rocket bodies are. You know, Rob is very intent on putting so much energy into debunking it before anything. And we did that. We went back, we tracked the ISS, where the patterns were, where it would have been. No, it wouldn't have been there. No, not at that time. Multiple apps. We take a lot of pride in doing that. So when something happens, we go unequivocally prove that, no, we cannot, we prove not what it is, we prove what it is not. It's like, no, it's not this, or this. But yeah, somehow, some way, we find ourselves where we need to be at the right time, right place.
Yeah. What are you planning to do now? What's the projects that are coming up here? Because you had one cancel. What were you going to do in South America?
We were actually going to be we spent 18 days with Ricardo Gonzalez.
Oh, okay, good.
It was wonderful. And Paula Harris, Giorgio Pacenza was with us, and we spent 18 days. So that's a full-length documentary that we have. I'm in the middle of post on that. You know, the side effect of the virus is not going to Argentina and not going to Bolivia. I've got a lot of time to work through about 20 hours of footage that we shot while we were in Peru. We went to some pretty sacred, amazing places: Marcahuasi, Huascaran, Cusco. You know, we had seen the Cusco crab, well, not seen it, but Rob had photographed the Cusco crab. So we went back, did follow up on that, the moon temples and everything. It was pretty amazing. And of course, Ricardo is just such a brilliant researcher. Like, he just knows, he's an encyclopedia. He is an encyclopedia. So we spent 18 days with him, and we were to do that. We were to go back to Argentina and spend considerable time with him back in the field, going to Capilla de Monte, and hope I said that right, different areas that he wanted to take us to. Same with Bolivia. We were going to be doing that as well, going to sacred spots. We are calling 2020, it'll probably be 2021 now, Making Contact Awakening. You know, the year before was kind of Making Contact Consciousness. You know, we were really delving into learning from people like Ricardo, and just to still our minds, get into a more meditative, deeper state. We've had, like, every 2 years we kind of evolve. You know, the first couple of years it was like, wow, what are we doing? It's more travel based and trying to figure things out. And then the next 2 years were kind of more technical. You know, we got very, very, very technical. And Rob delved into really understanding, you know, cameras and understanding that side of it. And the last year and a half, I think Rob would probably agree, it's been more of an educational process. You know, like, what makes these different places in the world so conducive to contact. I mean, you go to South America, this is second nature.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't something that you talk to. We've been on a beach in Chilca in Playa Yaya, and we've walked up to painters. Guys are just painting buildings, just random guys, and we say, hey, we were here last night, and this appeared over this little piece of mountain here. Did you guys ever see anything? They're not even looking at me. I look like a photographer. I'm back. I'm hanging. Liz is asking them in Spanish. Rob understands a lot of Spanish. Literally, the guy turned to Liz and Rob and described an object that came out of the water. Like, this was just like nothing to him. There was no buildup. It was like, oh yeah, OVNI, you know, USO, you know, unidentified submersible object comes out of the water, over, boom, takes off. But for them, it's a way of life. So we really made 2020, even though with the delays, 2020 was about going back to South America quite a bit. We really realized that we needed to upgrade ourselves and get to a point of, you know, higher learning.
Yeah. And you're around these contactees like Ricardo or Enrique. I always pointed out to them, like, you talk to them when they're young, they're like 14 years old and they're meditating when they're, you know, how many boys meditate at 14 years old? And it's like, and they can make the stuff appear around them. It's almost like the same thing where they're almost like magnets for this kind of stuff. And they're able to get in the field, which is my idea, is that the left brain is creating all the noise and the signal. And when you can go into meditation, you can quiet and make the contact, almost like Tony and his wife with the things where you make the contact and then you interact and everybody thinks you're crazy, but all you do is have a contact. So that's why I say, if you're going to understand the UFO phenomena, you got to deal with the people who are dealing with the phenomena. It doesn't really get you anything to look at metal pieces. It's all very interesting, but there's a lot of people who've got a very high level of contact. And I think you guys are probably in that category where stuff is happening around you, and luckily you've got, and that's the modern world. It's nobody reads books anymore. Des and I know that because we publish books. Everybody's into video, everybody's into YouTube, everybody's into stories, and so I think you're on the right track in terms of what you're doing.
Appreciate that, Grant, very much.
Wow.
Rob, what about you? Anything you want to throw in there?
Rob's video.
Well, I just say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi signal is not that
There's a little bit of a delay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just totally intrigued with this whole phenomena, Grant. And Marcus and I know that we have to get shoulder to shoulder with all these contactees. You know, I believe I had contact with an actual ET fella in Australia. It was actually confirmed by a person that I talked to on the internet that I don't even know, who we were doing a video call on another matter, and out of nowhere, he had no idea that we were even into UFOs. It was totally on another subject.
Yeah.
And he's just stopped for a second in the video call and said, I'm getting this psychic vision of you guys in Australia, and there's two of you, and there's a third, and you know, you made contact with an alien. And
wow.
He described what was happening. He had no idea. And he said, you made contact already.
Wow.
And so he said, you don't have to do it anymore. Well, speak for himself. Speak for himself, right? We definitely want to keep going.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's addictive.
We want to definitely.
And it seems like the stories are getting sort of more dramatic all the time. That where they're putting more and more weird stuff into the mix, where they know they've got your attention, and you hear this all the time with especially experiencers where they're told they have to do a book. Like the prime example is Sherry Wild, who had this very high level of contact, and she said she had no intention of doing a book, and she opened up the Word program one day, and the Word program was open, and she's going, "What is that?" And she looks, and it's on page 3.5, and she's looking, and suddenly she realizes it's her story, and she goes, "Oh no, we're not going there." And she didn't even remember writing it, and then she thought that looks pretty good. And I hear numerous experiencers who will say they were basically, the book was channeled to them. It was told them exactly where to do and what to do. So it's just to sort of stay open to what's going to happen, and it will happen. And you guys seem to approve that. And I appreciate your speaking with us, and maybe you can do another one once your next project comes out, because I think it's very important work in today's age where people are very visually tuned in to what's going on.
Thank you, Grant. We appreciate all.
Well, that's great, Grant. Thanks so much. You know what? I don't know if my signal is getting through there, but what we would like to personally do is invite you to come along on one of our expeditions with us.
Wow.
And especially if you have a certain place that you'd like to go. We'd be honored for you to come with us on one of these expeditions.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. We'll talk about that. That's a good way to close. I mean, that's, it's the old deal is like, once you get in it, it's like, you just can't get enough. It's like, they give you something more, and suddenly everybody thinks you're crazy because you're obsessed. But when you're living in this magical world, I mean, what choice have you got?
It's too fantastic. I mean, you can't turn away. Once you've seen it, you realize you could never go back to the way it was.
Yeah, and as with the New York Times, I'll close with this. With New York Times is, you may not think the signal's getting through or people are picking it up, but I remember because Rob was in it in the 60s, I was in it in the 70s, and all these years we've been at it, and it's like your tires are spinning, nobody believes you, it's not getting anywhere, and I remember I wrote an article called The 64 Reasons the Government Decided Not to Tell You the Truth, and Stephen Greer had the one, the stock market's going to melt down, people are going to jump off bridges, all the religious people are going to go crazy, whatever, and then what happens? New York Times puts the story out, yeah, the government is investigating UFOs, and everybody goes, yeah, I knew that already. And it's like you raise the thing and it makes it acceptable, almost like we're no different than any other social or political movement, whether it's African Americans or gay rights or whatever. It just gets to a point where everybody goes, oh yeah, okay, I get it. It's no big deal. And I think so you guys are doing a good job in sort of, especially because I think what the advantage to you guys is if you put it on TV or you put it somewhere, the skeptics can watch it. It's not like you're going to go into their face and confront them with it. It's on TV and they go, I'm going to watch this piece of garbage and laugh at it. And they sit in there and they don't realize they're getting subliminally trained as to what's going on. And more people do that. It's not an offensive way to get the message across. Whereas to go and try to convert somebody, it's just not going to work. So thank you, gentlemen, for what you're doing. And we'll talk about having a trip. And I really appreciate you telling me these stories. And we'll make sure you get a copy of the book. And it's one of the prime stories in the book. It is, as I said, in 45 years, this is one of the most bizarre stories I've ever heard, and it's got some of the best evidence ever. And people have got to pay attention that when you see a check like that, it means the world is not what you think it is, and you better rethink what's actually going on, because this proves that it's a whole different world. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Grant, very much. Thanks, Desta.
Thanks, guys.
Beautiful.
Thank
you very much. And we'll you've got copies of it, so